This is the channel. This is the story of Halifax. December 6, 1917. Halifax, Canada. The harbor was busy with ships carrying war supplies during World War I, but at 9:04 a.m., one ship exploded with the force of a nuclear bomb, and an entire city was blown apart. December in Halifax means cold. It's dark when people wake up, and it's dark again before the workday's done. Most days there are only a few hours between sunrise and sunset. So, if you didn't have a job in the harbor or something similar, you were probably home watching the flames dance on a nearby building when the French cargo ship SS Mont-Blanc arrived. The massive vessel had traveled from New York City with a cargo of more than 2,900 tons of explosives, including pickrite, gun cotton, dynamite, and gunpowder. In layman's terms, it was essentially a floating powder keg. Now, this wasn't uncommon during the war. Ships often carried munitions from factories to waiting troops. It was also not unusual for these vessels to be packed to the brim. In fact, the Mont-Blanc was dangerously overcrowded. She was designed to carry 1,200 tons of cargo, but the captain had loaded her so full that he could barely turn the wheel. On top of all that, the Mont-Blanc was being steered by a greenhorn. Captain Lemillon had never driven a ship before. He'd been promoted from cook. Of course, nobody knew that at the time. All they saw was a well-dressed officer confidently steering the massive ship through the water. At 8:45 a.m. on December, he turned the wheel to avoid a small Norwegian vessel called the SS. The two ships collided, causing a small fire on the starboard side of the Mont-Blanc. As the crew tried to put out the blaze, thick black smoke poured from the ship, engulfing the upper deck and drifting over Halifax harbor. People stopped what they were doing and stared at the burning vessel. Many stood at their office windows, some even at their kitchen window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the action. They would only get one chance. As the Mont-Blanc drifted closer to shore, more and more people crowded the waterfront, craning their necks to get a better look at the ship. Others ran home to grab their cameras, eager to snap a picture of the burning ship. Among them was 19-year-old William Whitman. He later told the press that it looked like 4th of July fireworks, except the red light from the ship's stern was much brighter. By 9 a.m., most of Halifax was staring at the Mont-Blanc. The ship had reached Richmond and Dartmouth wharves, two popular spots to watch the harbor traffic. Those who were standing closest to the waterfront saw a strange orange glow come from the stern of the ship. Then the whole vessel seemed to light up. People blinked, thinking they'd seen a shooting star. When they opened their eyes, the world was a fiery inferno. The Mont-Blanc exploded at 9:04 a.m. on December 6, 1917. What happened next has become known as the worst man-made disaster in human history. The blast came suddenly, with no warning. It was so powerful that the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., recorded it on a seismograph designed to detect earthquakes. On that winter morning, the air burst into flames. Flames consumed the entire harbor. The heat was so intense that it melted the rigging on nearby ships, causing them to collapse like fallen dominoes. Everything within a 1-mile radius of the explosion was immediately obliterated. In a matter of seconds, thousands of homes were reduced to piles of ash and twisted metal. The shockwave knocked people off their feet and shattered windows as far away as 80 kilometers. Those who were too far away to be incinerated were blasted into the air. They tumbled end over end until they hit the water. Those who were still alive but badly burned took shelter in the water. Some floated, others sat on pieces of debris, all of them screaming for help. A dense fog had rolled in that morning, so dense that a nearby ferry could unsee the flaming Mont-Blanc, until it was almost upon them. When the ship exploded, the ferry was thrown back, smashing into the shoreline. Survivors waded into the water to help anyone they could. Many were met with a scene straight out of hell. Dead bodies lay everywhere, many of them burnt beyond recognition. It was then that rescue workers realized the extent of the damage. More than 2,000 people were dead. At least 9,000 were injured. Thousands more were blinded by flying glass. An estimated 6,000 people were left homeless. The area surrounding the port was unrecognizable. Entire city blocks had vanished. Streets were covered with dead bodies and ruins. A worker later said that he felt like he'd wandered into a haunted house. Over the next few days, volunteers combed through the wreckage looking for survivors. Most of those found were in shock, having lost everything and everyone they knew. Doctors set about the grisly task of identifying the dead. Many of the bodies were so badly burnt that it was impossible to tell who they were. Fingerprints were taken and dental records checked, but that only identified 34 of the dead. The rest were buried in mass graves. Most of the 1,000 or so people who managed to escape the city were suffering from severe burns, making them easy targets for gangs of street corner boys who thought it would be funny to throw rocks at them. Many of the wounded were already blind and disoriented. When the attackers approached, they never saw it coming. As the world began to comprehend the scope of the tragedy, people wondered how it could have been prevented. To make matters worse, the cause of the accident was simple. The Mont-Blanc had been carrying highly explosive material without any warning signs. If the captain had simply flown a red flag from the ship's mast, everybody would have known to stay away. And that was not even required by law. It was just common courtesy. To add insult to injury, the accident could have been avoided entirely. The IMO had signaled that she wanted to pass on the starboard side of the Mont-Blanc, but the captain never responded. He should have turned the ship to his right, but he turned it to his left. That's why he'd collided with the IMO instead. It really was just a case of inexperience. Of course, that did little to assuage the crowds in Halifax who were demanding answers. After the explosion, the city's acting mayor refused to allow the Nova Scotia government to take charge of the situation. He blocked the roads, cut off communication with the outside world, and set up armed barricades. He told the press that he planned to hold whoever was responsible for the disaster accountable. In reality, he was hiding the fact that the city had no idea what to do. Even if they had, there was nobody to tell them because Halifax had ignored the problem of maritime traffic for years. Despite its size, the city had just one tugboat to direct ships in and out of the harbor. The tugboat had broken down 3 weeks before the explosion. Nobody bothered to fix it. But the truth is, nobody was to blame. There was no single person or entity responsible for the tragedy. The disaster was caused by a series of bad decisions made by inexperienced officers, unmaintained equipment, inadequate legislation, a lack of safety protocols, and a handful of other minor factors. Basically, it was bound to happen. And now people were asking whether it should. In the aftermath of the explosion, the Canadian government faced pressure to regulate shipping. The Halifax explosion had been the worst man-made disaster in human history. It was so powerful that it dwarfed the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So just imagine what it must have been like for the folks in Halifax. Within a minute, they'd gone from watching a ship burn to stumbling through a nuclear wasteland. The Canadian government knew that they had to do something to prevent another disaster like this from happening anywhere else in the world. They passed sweeping new laws regarding navigation, harbor safety, and the transportation of hazardous materials. Those laws would become the foundation for maritime safety around the globe. Halifax would never forget December 6th. Every year on the anniversary of the explosion, the city stops and remembers. Sirens blare and a lone piper plays as wreaths are tossed into the harbor. For a moment, the city stands still, remembering the 2,000 people who died and the thousands more who survived. Halifax was torn apart by an explosion that shouldn't have happened. The deadliest bombs aren't always dropped from the sky. Sometimes they're carried silently into our harbors. Thanks for watching.